How's it going, everybody? This is Dailies to Downloads. My name is Chad. With me is Eric. He doesn't have a hat, but we're going to go forward anyway. Doesn't feel right without you having a hat.
I'll keep my head above the camera so that you can't see the hair. That way, I'll just stand upright.
If you do that randomly throughout the show, it'll be somewhat unsettling, I think.
Okay, I won't do it.
All right, so this week we're going to continue our discussion about documentaries and all the different genres and subgenres that branch off of that. And this week, it's not really documentaries that we're discussing, but we are discussing docudramas, or as it can be known as documentary drama. But docudrama is a term that has gained a lot of popularity over the years. So we'll start with our definitions. And it is a genre of radio or television programming or feature film or stage theater which features dramatized reenactments of actual events. And it's the core elements of its story of a docudrama strives to adhere to historical facts while allowing a greater or lesser degree of dramatic license to some of the details. So dialogue may include the actual words that were used in real life, but or that were put down in historical documents. Docudrama producers sometimes choose their reconstruction events in the actual locations in which the historical events occurred. And it's, although it's widely known as docudramas are generally distinguished from a regular film that's just based on true events. And, because that, they say here, it implies that if you're based on true events, you're allowing a greater degree of dramatic license from the concept of a historical drama. So what do you think, Eric? We looked at some of these examples of what a docudrama includes, to me, whether it's a docudrama or based on true events, to me, they kind of talk about the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the examples would be a lot more far and few between. There have been instances, of course, where filmmakers will make a film that's a fictional retelling of something that is based on true events, and they have cast the actual people who were part of those real events in the roles. That can be rare, but I think of that. Did you see that Clint Eastwood one a few years ago? That 1517 to Paris. That those soldiers who were on the train, and then it was being overtaken by a terrorist attack, and they had to fight back to,
right.
He actually cast the actual soldiers as themselves in this retelling,
right.
Which is kind of. I think it's cooler in theory than it is. Like, obviously they're not real actors, so like it's going to come with a different kind of feel. And like, is it somewhat therapeutic for them to almost be recreating this trauma or like going through this again? Like it's a little, it's a little strange. There was the Safdie brothers one, the Heaven Knows What, from like 5 years ago, and that is also a fictional retelling of the lead actress's actual struggle with homelessness and drug abuse and things like that. So, I mean, they can be interesting, and sometimes it can work. But outside of that kind of, I don't want to say stunt casting, but kind of meta casting, maybe. I feel like it's harder to find examples where it is something special.
Right, and you had mentioned the Clint Eastwood film, and when I thought of docudramas, I really thought of Paul Greengrass. To me, he was the director who really, he maybe didn't create the term, but he certainly crafted the types of movies that made that term mean something. But then when you look at some of the lists of movies, you kind of scratch your head because, a lot of them, like you had mentioned in the last episode we did, Frost Nixon, which movies like that are on there where they're, historical films based on true events, but they're called docudramas. And when I think of a docudrama, I think of a movie that it tackles something that really happened, but might use actors, and it might use a lot of the like the same type of setup and all that, but it is filmed in a sort of documentary way, as if you were seeing it really happen. And docudramas tend to demonstrate like characteristics like that, like representation of actual historical events. It's based on what actually happened. They use literary or narrative techniques to flesh out bare facts of the event to tell a story, and some degree of license is taken with minor historical facts for the sake of enhancing the drama. And to me, that's simply making a movie. You can, if it's based, there's all sorts of different ways of saying based on true events, based on actual events, based on real life events, inspired by, like there's all sorts of ways of saying it. But to me, all those films are the same thing. But if you look at a movie like Greengrass's United 93 or Bloody Sunday, for example, those movies are filmed in a way where you don't necessarily know any of the actors by their faces. And it's filmed in a way where you feel like you are actually there, like you're actually watching it unfold. And to me, that's what a docudrama really illustrates, rather than simply a biopic, which there are some biopics on the list that I looked at. So I don't know.
Yeah. And I guess, like, yeah, the United 93 comparison opens up the idea of, like, sometimes in theater they'll call, like, verbatim theater, where I think United 93 is actually using also, like, a lot of the actual phone calls and the actual what was being spoken about on the ground in those flight control rooms, where you're not dramatizing it, you're taking the verbatim dialogue in kind of, and I feel like that's probably a great example of that. I think Paul Greengrass did that again too with that July 22nd movie about the shooting that was on Netflix like 2 years ago, about the mass shooting. Yeah, I think that's a good example of. I feel like that might be perhaps harder to do in film than it may be in theater. Like I'm just thinking of, like, the playwright and actress Anna Devery Smith, who was an oral historian, and she would interview a lot of people about a subject, and then she made a one-woman show playing all those characters, and the dialogue are from those interviews.
Right.
So she didn't create. There's an artifice because she's performing as she's Al Sharpton now, and now she's Jesse Jackson, and now she's but all the text is actually from the interviews of what they've said, and then so in film, I feel like that's harder to get. I don't want to say harder to get away with, but I feel like we allow a lot more maybe dramatic license, like in terms of Frost Nixon, very little. I mean, it's pretty much all kind of made up in a sense. We know that they actually had the interviews, they met in the house, they had the blah blah, but like every individual scene is obviously kind of a dramatic artifice, right? Like we don't know. They all kind of went as was. To actually strip something down to having, the word for word kind of comparisons, like I feel like is a much harder, much rarer thing, unless it's like famous speeches that like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King or what have you, where we do have a comparison to give to the actual actor doing it. But
right, and like some of the other examples that you'll see on the list, at least that I saw on Wikipedia, they list like 127 hours, which I don't understand how that is a docudrama in any way. Obviously, the gentleman who experienced those events, obviously it really happened to him, but Danny Boyle uses a lot of special effects.
Yeah.
In that movie, and so to me it doesn't resemble a documentary in any way. It's just a movie.
No.
And a lot of people liked that movie, and that's great. But to call it a docudrama, if we call something like that a docudrama, or you also see The Pianist, the 2002 movie with Adrian Brody, if you're going to say that's a docudrama, then you would have to say every World War II movie based on true events is somewhat of a docudrama. But to me, it's really not. So you almost wonder, as we're talking about it, if the term docudrama doesn't really mean much at all.
Yeah, I guess, like, that's why off line, I was asking you like the definition or how it's kind of categorized, because the only times that I can kind of really remember it kind of being used was almost like TV movies, like these like what we call like the movies of the week, which I don't know if they really exist anymore, but that were like a 2-part 4-hour movie about Woody Allen and Mira Farrow, or the Jean Benet Ramsey case, or these kind of things that were stripped from the headlines and were obviously this fictionalized retelling. But I feel like that's when I would hear like docudramas, and they didn't really have any explanation of what the hell that meant. But it always kind of felt almost like a still developing case, and they were kind of making this fictional movie as a piece of evidence or legislation or whatever. Like it felt very much like timely and very much part of the now. And I feel like now the term has been so expanded that it sounds like it's nothing more than just based on true events, I guess.
Yeah, it was kind of a trendy term there for a while. And, I guess, if that's how they're going to describe something that's based on true events, I really think that misrepresents what you're seeing, because when you, like I said, and I've said this in other episodes, when you put the term documentary in any way in front of something, to me, it gives off a vibe. It gives the viewer a certain expectation of what
Mm-hmm.
they're going to see. And when you look at a list and it has Hollywoodland on there, which,
Yeah.
like, in no way is Hollywoodland a documentary. I like that
Yeah.
movie a lot, actually, but he in that movie uses 3 different ways of how George Reeves passed away. So,
And we all know Ben Affleck played Batman in real life, okay? Not Superman. I mean, we all know that. But
yeah, and like, just we'll go over some of these the ones that are on this list just to show how kind of silly this is. You'll have Good Night and Good Luck on there, Charlie Wilson's War, Cinderella Man, Bridge of Spies, Hidden
take your pick.
First Man, which is pretty recent.
First, but not Apollo 13. But first,
That's up there as well. Yep, that's
oh, okay, good. Okay, at least we're being
these are
inclusive.
all historical dramas. Is what they are, really.
Yeah, I feel like there's like, there is a whole genre of like the whole based on real, like I think I saw Zodiac on there, and like any kind of serial killer crime thing, where I feel like that is I don't know. It's either a genre or like there is an audience for that kind of thing. We call it like true crime, I guess.
Right.
Which is the same kind of thing that's based on true crimes, but there's a fictionalized, dramatic, sensationalized element to it, and people really eat that stuff up. They like that, yeah.
Right.
Um, but it's like it's very clear that and also typically in a lot of those instances, it's about like this person was never found,
Right.
or they're still a part of this story that we don't have the answer to, and hopefully our film is like a part of solving that mystery.
Right.
Like you almost feel like a participant in a way, in that kind of thing. Where these other examples, a First Man, I feel like a pretty passive viewer watching something like that, and outside
Right.
of it based on something real.
Yeah, and like I said, to me, the term, if it was being defined more or more accurately, it really is like a movie that is based on a historical event, but is filmed in a way to make you feel like you were there, to make you feel like it's actually happening. Like Greengrass was very famous for the kind of shaky technique of his camera, and
Mm-hmm.
or to make you kind of feel, on edge, as if you were actually there. I'll never forget seeing United 93 in the theater. That was very much a one of a kind experience. It made that whole scenario feel very real. And I got the same with Bloody Sunday, which obviously was a historical event that I didn't have happen to me necessarily, and wasn't really as much of a news in the U.S. as 9/11 was, but it was still filmed in that way. You get the sense that you're experiencing everything as these characters are, which is what the term meant to me. But if it's going to become a broad term now, and it just then why use
Yeah.
it?
I guess, like what you're talking about with Paul Greengrass, like I guess that is a good example of using what we would consider documentary cinema verite like techniques on a working with actors, fiction. So like, yeah, when you're seeing a Paul Greengrass film in theaters, a lot of people are like, oh, like I got nauseous, or like
Right.
it was it's cutting every 2 seconds, and it's cameras all over the place, and it's too much, handheld, et cetera, et cetera. Like I think, and then he applied that to like the Bourne movies in a similar way. Well, obviously it's a fictional story, but the same kind of what we associate with like nonfiction filmmaking techniques he used on these
Right.
other kind of things. That can be pretty interesting, and he's, yeah, someone who I think has pretty much stuck to that style, like as most recently as that last one he made. Whereas when you see a filmmaker like a Barbara Koppel or Steve James or even Michael Moore, like they've each done a fictional narrative movie,
Right.
they abandon all of their documentary stuff, their
Right.
technique, and just try to do a straightforward. Barbara Koppel did Havoc, that Anne Hathaway uh risque movie, but it's like usually it's not successful when a documentary filmmaker tries to cross over, if you will, or vice versa. Well,
I mean,
because there are
there's a short list of documentarians who have made fictional films and made careers out of both sets. Certainly,
yeah,
certainly Herzog comes to mind. You know,
yeah, and even
Rescue Dawn is on this list of docudramas, and he also
really,
made a actual documentary on the actual man that went through those events in Rescue Dawn. So
really, wow. I mean, yeah, some filmmakers like, but I guess they know that there are different techniques. Like Spike Lee will toggle between the two, and like
yeah,
his documentaries are a little bit more standard. They're good, but they're definitely what we would, typical documentary kind of form, right? And even Scorsese, like his documentaries are pretty typical kind of,
they are.
you
Yeah, yeah.
know.
Except for
It,
except for Rolling Thunder, which
except for Rolling Thunder, when he tries, but like all of his like 6 hour, the Bob No Direction Home, and My Voyage to Italy, all those kind of things, they're pretty standard. So, but yeah, Paul Greengrass, I feel like, is one of the only ones who actually took documentary techniques and applied them to and yeah, for 1993, it works pretty well. And that was also an example of like everyone in those traffic, air traffic control thing. Like I think he was using the actual people who were doing air traffic control on 9/11, and having them. That's why it feels real, and they don't feel like performances because they're not dramatic. They're just reciting stuff, which is
right,
like how the day went, I guess. But,
right. And there's really not much else to say about docudramas. Although since we are talking about these, another small section of this whole subgenre is called fake fiction. I don't know if you've ever heard of this term, Eric, but fake fiction is a type of film which wants to tell a real story, which wants to tell a like it would like actual events, but it's edited in a way like a fictional film. And when I
okay.
saw this, the term fake fiction to me is very odd. And
Wouldn't fake
I researched
fiction
this,
be real?
there's a film called Where is Rocky 2, which is directed by Pierre Bismuth, and apparently it's telling a real story, but it's edited in the way that a standard Hollywood film would be. But I can't find it anywhere, so I can't really tell you if the term fake fiction actually
I
makes
wonder.
sense or not.
I would be curious just to see what that even really means. I'm sure, like, I
Right.
can't even imagine if it's all as a result of the editing, or like, is he actually telling the people that he's filming to like recreate? Well,
Right. It kind of makes your head explode to think about it.
is that the only example? Is that the only fake fiction as Where's Rocky 2 as its crowning?
I think there was one other example listed,
Okay.
but it was not a film I had ever heard of either.
Okay.
It's obviously a very small corner of this world, but
I'd be curious. I'd be curious to see what that is, what that even looks like.
I honestly tried hard to track it down today to see if I could watch it and see what it was like, but I was not able to find it anywhere. So,
Yeah. Huh.
anywho, this concludes our docudramas. We will wrap up our documentary talk next week by going rapid fire on some more of the smaller documentary terms. There's There's actually more out there. We haven't talked about silent documentaries yet. We haven't talked about Ken Burns yet, which we talked about in our first episode. We would cover. We will cover Ken Burns. And
I'm even more confused than when we started now. What do we call those?
But yes, we will wrap up next week. And thank you again for joining us. For Eric, my name is Chad. Give us a like, give us a comment, anything. Give us anything. That's the way I say it.
Give us a GoFundMe page. I'll get a haircut.
Yeah.
Give me a couple bucks. Venmo me a few dollars.
Give Eric a few dollars. Maybe he'll get a new hat.
Maybe.
Anything. All
Anything.
right. We will talk to you next week. Thank you, and good night, and good luck.